Let's put ourselves in the presence of God. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Almighty and ever-loving God, we glorify and thank your name. You have showered us with so much blessings, and your presence continuously reminds us of your faithfulness and guidance. We humbly ask you to shower our speaker today with your greatest inspiration so that she may share the most of her knowledge, heart, and soul to this talk. May we also absorb what we may learn today and put it into practice. Your infinite blessing would mean the success of this webinar. May we be living witness to your genuine love through the enactment of the knowledge acquired through this activity. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, so welcome to today's talk on children's book writing. Let me first introduce our speaker. We're joined here today by Miss Lexie Yut.
Okay, so again, our speaker for today is Miss Lexie Yut. She is a Texas-based author and illustrator who lives and works in Austin, Texas. She wrote her first picture book, Bossy Pants, in 2017. Lexie is an extroverted introvert who loves listening to and telling stories. She is a frequent library goer and is always inspired by the many beautiful picture books tucked away in overflowing bookshelves. When she is not writing children's books, Lexie can be found with her nose in a romance novel or spending time with friends and family. You can learn more at www.patyut.me.
Okay, I think we're good. Well, hello everyone. My name is Lexie Yut, and thank you so much for letting me speak. I'm really excited to talk to you guys about the magic of children's book writing and what it takes to basically the process that I take when I sit down to draft, edit, and publish a children's book. So there's a lot of different things that kind of go into it. So I want to go step by step with you guys today, and feel free to, like Amber said, to put the any questions that you might have in the chat. That would be great. You might hear my dog in the background. He might come and say hi. But so I've written and published 4 books. You can see them here. Bossy Pants, Buffett and His Boy, Splish Splash Squash, and Wildflower, Wildflower. Go forward. You can probably hear my dog in the background drinking his water. But let's make a book. That's what we're talking about today. So the thing that I always tell people is you got to start with an idea. How do you do that? You carry a notebook. Everywhere you go, carry a notebook, whether it's a physical notebook that you keep in your hand and in your back pocket, or if it's just a notes app on your phone, always just write down any thoughts that you might have in a place that you can just brain dump. Whatever method you choose, make sure just to keep a running list, and then you will be referencing that list when you sit down to write your book. So I'll give you some advice when you're trying to brainstorm a topic to write about. Try to divide it up into, what are you writing for? Is it academic? Is it creative? And what genre do you want to write? Fiction, nonfiction? Try to zoom out and think about the categorical things that you want to divide your story into. I know that I like to creatively express myself through my writing and haven't really dabbled with academic purposes. So when I sit to write things out or kind of brainstorm, I try to think in that mental space of, okay, I'm doing this to express my creativity, and how do I do that, and what ideas kind of fall under that bucket. So I find that really helpful to kind of zoom out and look at the big buckets of topics. Like I said, that idea notebook, starting with an idea is where I begin. If I'm walking down the street and something cute or funny pops into my head, or I see something that I'm like, that would make a really great story, I write that down. And then I begin to ask myself questions. Would I read this book? Would I enjoy this story? Do I enjoy writing about this topic? So if I don't have the passion behind writing, then I don't really want to write about it. I want to make sure that I have, that oomph, that pizzazz when I sit down and I write about something. Another question I ask myself is, what aspects do I need to research in order to write about this subject? Maybe I'm not an expert on the thing I want to write about. So what do I need to do in order to research further and understand further what that topic will be. And then the last question, I kind of try to, I don't always think about this question, honestly, but it is important to consider, is this a standalone story? Is it a series, a trilogy? What's my goal? What's my mission with telling this story? I'll give an example, like my book, Bossy Pants. Here, I'll pull it up. So this book, Bossy Pants, I wrote it initially as just a standalone book, Bossy Pants. But then as I kind of went through the process, I thought, hey, I could make a whole pants family. Why not Smarty Pants? Why not Sporty Pants? So things like that, thinking about like a theme around one story, it's kind of good to know that going into it. So I'd recommend asking yourself those questions. And then kind of phasing, into another part of the brainstorm process is, who's your audience? Who are you going to write for? I write for children. I write for the age group 4 to 8. Sometimes that's, just 4 to 6-year-olds. Sometimes it's the whole span of 4 to 8-year-olds. So how do I kind of make sure that the words I'm using, the sentences I'm using, the colors, everything is targeted towards that specific audience? So if you want to write long form and you want to write for young adults, understand that that is your audience. What will they like? What do they enjoy? What words do they use frequently in their day? So just understanding, what best fits the mold of your ideal reader. Like, how do you write and how do you match up with those categories of who your target audience could be? And then always, it seems pretty rudimentary, but always remember setting, character, plot, and then beginning, middle, end. Those things are like my essential tools that I start every story with. I try to break it down. Okay, where is this story going to take place? It's going to be in France? Awesome. Who's my main character? Is it going to be a bossy little girl with a crown? Is it going to be a dog and his best friend? Things like that I try to sketch out beforehand and understand where the story is going to take me before I try to dive into the details of the story. So I know we learned, setting character, plot when we were very young, but they're essential tools to telling a story. So I recommend really following on those. And, when you're penciling it out, chunk it into the start, the middle, and the end of the story. And how do you want that to flow? And then don't forget, do your research. So this is a picture of what my living room looks like when I'm doing my research for my kids' books. I go to the library, I go to the children's book section, and maybe I want to be writing about sailboats. And I gather up all of the books about sailboats as I possibly can. And I walk home with a big pile of books in my arms, and I just spread them out everywhere. And I sit in the middle of it and I say, okay, where do I want to pull my inspiration from? How do I want to write this book? Do I like how this author did something? Do I not like it how they did this way? So I really recommend, lean on the resources that you have. Libraries are wonderful things and they're there for a reason. So definitely, pop your head into a library and do as much research as you can. And then the next big phase of book writing, and this is maybe one of my favorite phases, is storyboarding. And I'm kind of old school. I literally just take a piece of computer paper and a Sharpie, and I just start going crazy on the piece of paper. You can kind of tell this is a storyboard for Bossy Pants, and you can see how it's not so perfect, right? There's things that are crossed out and scribbled in and not really well done, but that's not the point. It's not to do it perfectly the first time. Don't be afraid to be messy. The idea is to just put your outline in front of you and see what works and see what doesn't work. If this square right here doesn't work there, where can I put it elsewhere in the storyboard that it would make more sense? So once you see it visually in front of you, you can even take, I've done where you do it on like a sticky note or a Post-it note, and you just do your little illustration or you do your little, dialogue that's going to be on that page, and just move them around, right? It's an interactive process. It's an iterative process that you can really just go and have fun with. The point of it is to just express yourself and try to get the story to form. You're not trying to be perfect. So scribbling, writing in the margins, inserting key phrases that want to be in the story, definitely storyboarding is the time to do that for sure. And then, you know, as the storyboard kind of forms and you see it coming together, especially if you're doing it with like a picture book, you see the picture kind of like, just like, you know, like I think of like a script for a film, right? You see the kind of scenes coming together. It's time to start putting the imagery and the words together. So it's time to start doing that rough draft. And that's where kind of the harder part comes into play. You know, at first you're just storyboarding and going crazy with ideas, and now you're like really having to think about, you know, the setting, the plot, the beginning, middle, and end, and like the meat that goes underneath those categories, right? So the key is, again, not perfection. You want to just write. You don't want to worry about messing up or it not making sense. That's what editing is for. But you do want to try to add as much detail as you possibly want in that story. If you want to, you know, go crazy on the adjectives, you know, the rough draft is the space to do so. And I always say that your rough draft is your map. So it's going to be the thing that kind of guides you throughout the rest of the process. It's going to be kind of your beacon of, you know, this is what my story is, and this is what I want it to accomplish, and this is how I want it to feel. So that's definitely a harder part of book writing, I will say, but it's also really fun. And it's where like the rubber meets the road, so to speak. And this is like the point, the pivotal point for me as an author and an illustrator, where I start to incorporate my digital tools. So I illustrate my books in the Adobe Creative Suite. So I'm working in Photoshop, I'm working in Illustrator, I'm working in Publisher to try to make it all come together. So this is the point in my process where I want to start interjecting those tools, right? So I've been like writing in, you know, margins and on pieces of paper. Now I want to make it so that I have a more formal place that I'm working. I'm, you know, working in a Google Doc that's saving my edits. I don't want to be writing on paper anymore, because, you know, if that gets thrown away, then there goes all of my hard work. So this is the point where I kind of tell people, make sure you have copies, make sure you have backups, make sure that you're keeping track of like the digital footprint of your work, because it, you know, in this day and age, that's just as important. And with the illustration part, that's where I kind of start to put, you know, I play with like fonts, like what font do I think would fit like this specific page, this emotion, when, you know, this girl is being really loud, so I want a bold text. So using these digital tools at this point in the process is helpful for me to sort of pull together the end vision of how the illustration complements the written word on the page as well. And this is an example I wanted to show you guys of, you know, this image right here of the hedgehog on the left is something I sketched out in my sketchbook throughout the brainstorming process. But, you know, it's not going to live in my sketchbook. It's going to be a digital piece, a part of my my book. So I need to make that transfer. So you can kind of see what that transfer looks like. It's very similar, and, you know, you can feel free to change what you want and keep what you want. And with this particular image, I happen to really like it, and I thought that it kind of reflected the overall tone of that page. So it pretty much made a direct transfer, honestly. But that's not always the case. Sometimes the doodle on the sketchbook is completely different than the final illustration on the page. But definitely incorporating your digital tools is a very important part of the process. And then the fun part, which is lots and lots of editing. Again, this is a space where you have to be kind of brutal with yourself, but also don't be afraid to change things that you didn't like. I have, you know, written sentences or done illustrations that just didn't feel right, but I wanted to throw it on the page, so I had it as a placeholder. This is the time now that I can go back and I can change that placeholder to fit what I want the story to say, right? So here's a great example of the cover of my book, Bossy Pants. You can kind of see I started with this kind of simple design and then iterated through it and then said, well, maybe I can change the colors. And then I was like, nope, just kidding. I'm going to go in a completely different direction. I'm going to do bright yellow and bold pink font and colors like that. So you can really just don't be afraid to change it up. If you are stuck, I would recommend, you know, throwing a different color onto it. or completely like scrambling the sentence and seeing, does that make me feel better about where the story is going? So editing is an important part of my illustration process, but also the writing process of editing is like the nugget, the core of how you write a book, right? So these are my top tips for the editing process, and ones that I frequently have to remind myself of, because I forget them. I forget them frequently. But the top one is rest your draft. So you're done with your draft. You have a semi-finished work, right, start to finish. At that point, set it aside. Go outside, go for a walk, distract yourself, talk to some friends and family, literally remove yourself from the act of writing, because then when you come back with a fresh brain and fresh eyes and clear thoughts, it's like you're reading a completely different story, right? And I'm sure, you guys probably have experience doing that. You walk away from something, you come back and you're like, did I really write that? So it's very helpful to kind of take a pause, a step back, and then come to it again. Because each time you come back, there'll be something new that you see in your draft that you can improve upon, or that you can, remove entirely, or change up in whatever way that you want to change. So that's definitely my biggest piece of advice, is rest your draft. The next one is listen to your manuscript out loud. So I tend to write in prose. I tend to do, rhyming stanzas in the way that I write my books. So I like to read them out loud because, especially with kids, they like that rhythm, that kind of sing-songy type of vibe to a book. So in order for me to make sure that that sounds right when you read it aloud, it's a completely different thing than when you read it off the page. So listening to your manuscript out loud in your own voice is important, but also equally important is having someone else read it, not just yourself, because you know how to read it. You wrote the words, you built the sentences, but can someone else read it in the same way that you are? So definitely, both sides needs to occur. You need to be able to be comfortable in reading your manuscript, but also hand it off to someone, hand it off to your mom and say, hey, can you read this for me? Does it sound good? And that is, helpful to kind of see what works, what doesn't work, right? And then lastly, search for troubling words or phrases. This kind of goes hand in hand with my previous bullet point. When you read your work, what parts do you stumble over? Are there words that don't quite fit? Are there words that are a bit too long? Especially writing for younger audiences, there are some words that they just can't pronounce yet, right? So don't include those in your story, or if you do include them, make sure you include some sort of glossary or index. How do you say this big word? It's this big scary word. How do I say it? How do I pronounce it? So keep that in mind. Again, going back to who are you writing for? Who's your audience? Keep that in mind for what words could be considered troubling. For older audiences, that's a completely different rubric, and you kind of have to just think about what words would be suitable in that situation. But those are my tips for editing. And then you repeat. You do it again and again and again until you feel, it's hard to describe, but you feel like you're ready to send the story out into the world. At the point when the story no longer becomes your own and it's now ready to be out into the world, to be shared with others, you have a sense for when that time comes. And trust your instinct on it. Trust your gut. Don't trust, I tend to kind of pick at something and pick at it, and I don't know when to stop. But my gut will tell me, hey, this is ready to be shared with others. It's ready for, the publishing part of writing a book. So, listen to that. You'll feel it. But listen to when your gut is like, all right, we're done with the editing process. What's next? But definitely, I would also recommend the repeat part of editing is very important. Don't just skip through it. You might think like, oh, my gut told me it's ready to go after the first edit. At least do, 3 or 4 rounds and kind of share it with your peers, peer reviewing, family reviewing, things like that. Super helpful. But that's the editing process. It's long, it's arduous, but it's helpful and important to writing a good story. And then after lots of editing and lots of changes and lots of, just iterations, you have a finished book. And I know that there's a lot of nooks and crannies and things that you don't think about, but I wanted to give you guys like a high level bird's eye view of what my process looks like. So that's kind of the summation, the start to finish. There's a lot of time, to consider. Sometimes I can write a book in, a matter of months. Sometimes it takes years. So every story is different. Every process is different. I've written 4 stories, and each one has been a different process, and I've learned something new along the way. But just, have fun with it. That's my biggest piece of advice is this is your expression. This is, your thing that you're putting out into the world. And so you can have some fun with it, and you can try to express yourself in the way that you see fit. But that's the process, and then you get to share your story with the world. And these are some pictures of folks with my books, and just sharing the stories with the world. And it's a really fulfilling process, and it's fun to look at something that you've created and be proud of it. But yeah, with that, I'll kind of open up for question and answers. I wanted to leave time for you guys to ask me anything you want. I'm very open about, the process and what I've learned along the way. I've been doing it for 3 or 4 years now, formally publishing books, but I've been writing since I was, yay high. So, but yeah, I will open it up for questions if anyone has any.
Do you ever, when you write a story, do you ever feel like you're doubting whether or not the story is something that people need? Like, how do you get through that, the insecurity of writing? Because I feel like that's an issue for myself and many of the writers I know. Like, why would I write something if, for example, another author I admire has written something similar? How do you get over that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I kind of think of it in my head as like imposter syndrome. You're like,
Right.
should I really be putting this story out there? Does it deserve to be out there? And I definitely have struggled with that myself. And I think my answer to, how do I get over that is sharing it with people who I know would enjoy a story like that, and hearing their feedback. And they're usually quite honest. I will, so for my second book, I actually sent it to my elementary school teachers. I said, here, I have this new book. Can you test read it for me? Can you tell me what you think? And it was really, a rough draft. And they gave me their feedback, and they were, they gave me some criticisms and some, brutal feedback, but it helped my story be better. And then with that feedback, it made me think this story deserves to be out there because it's now a thing that they have given me their insight on as educators and experts in that field of reading books to kids. So I think that leaning on your community a little bit and having them kind of like yes, write that story. We want you to do the work to put the story out into the world. It helps with that imposter syndrome, at least for me.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
For sharing. There are some questions in the chat. I'm going to read them and you can answer them. The first one is from John Jacob Samilia. In general, what's the age range for the target audience?
It kind of depends on, so there's a lot of different opinions on where you chunk the different target audiences. For me, I knew I wanted to write for young readers. That is a very, the definition of that is very arbitrary, right? But I knew that I wanted to write picture books for young readers. So then it narrows it down a little bit further. And then I knew that I wanted to write, they call them board books, and then just early reader books. And so then that narrowed it down even further, right? So I kind of cozied up into this little niche that I found myself to be, what I could do and what I could create fit it fit well under that target audience. But do some research on, if you want to write for young adults or adults, you can do some research on which niche of those different larger categories fits best with what you want to write and what your writing style is.
Okay, that's kind of related to the third question. So I'm going to go back to the second question afterwards because this third question is about what made you want to write children's books.
Well, I love that question because my answer to it is kind of fun. So I published my first book when I was still in university, and I had actually taken a course that was specific to children's literature. I don't know how I stumbled upon it, but it was one of those classes that, the instructor had us reading Harry Potter and Charlotte's Web and these really fun books that I grew up loving. And actually, we had a section in the course that literally just broke down the process of how to write a book. And I was sitting there and I was like, I think I could do that. And I had always, like I said, I've always been a writer. I've always been a drawer, illustrator, and like creative in that way. But when I saw the mechanics of how a book comes to be, I was like, I think I could do that. And I think I want to try to do that. And so I kind of just went for it. I made a lot of mistakes, but it was that, that spark of that class. It was a children's literature class at university.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
So this was what? Maybe your first year of university?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because by the time we met in third year, you had already published your book.
I had, yes. So I think it was my second year. You're right.
Nice. Okay, so the second question that I skipped earlier is from Sherry Ang del Rosario. Any advice when you always have a lot of beginning ideas but never seem to come up with a middle or end?
I'm the same way. So my advice might not be super solid, but I have a long list, like right now on my phone. You can scroll and there's, different ideas, super long list. And what I have found helps me is to start looking at other things for inspiration. So that photo that I shared of like the books scattered everywhere, I will walk into a library or a bookstore and just start pulling things that, catch my eye, and I look at them in an analytical way. What about this story made me feel something? Did I like it? Did I not like it? And then I start to think of my list of ideas and try to like draw a parallel. Which one would I, passionately write about? That's another part of like my decision to kind of dive deeper into an idea that I have. Is, am I passionate about it, or was it just kind of like a silly idea I had while walking down the street? So, like, for example, I have this book, Buffett and His Boy. I don't know if you guys can see it. This one is very near and dear to my heart, and the idea came from my dog that you guys heard earlier at the beginning of the call. So that story is written about him. So obviously I'm very passionate about that, and I have a lot of love about the subject. And so that made it an easier story to write. So I would recommend, narrowing it down first by that. Like, what do you love to write about? And then start there, and then start to extrapolate. Why do you like writing about it? And then pull from inspirational stories from bookshelves. So.
Okay, the next one is about the publishing process. Can you walk us through the process of self-publishing and your experience with a publisher, if applicable?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that was very hard for me to like wrap my head around when I first started. I knew that self-publishing was a thing. I knew that it was probably the way that I wanted to go because I like to see the whole process end to end. I like to be the creator. I like to be the marketer. I like to be the shipper of the book to the people who get it. So I published through Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing. And so with Amazon, they help with like the shipping and all of the behind the scenes, and they're very good at like bringing aboard new self-published authors. So I did a lot of webinars, and I did a lot of meet and greets with other authors who are also self-published. So leaning on your community again. It's kind of funny. I have like a group of 12 authors on Instagram. We just found each other on Instagram, and we have a little group chat. And we support each other in that way. So that was my self-publishing kind of journey. I have not done, a official formal publisher yet, but maybe in the future, we'll see.
Okay. Yeah, you can actually buy Lexie's books on Amazon, both as Kindles and as physical books. That way, you get to reach like different parts of the world because they take care of the shipping, like you said.
Yeah, and that's another part. Like Amazon publishing, there's lots of literature out there of how to do it and ways that you can learn how to do it. It's very easy. I will say that they make it super easy. And like for my international friends, like Ma'am Amber, I can easily send those books to those places. So that was another reason why I enjoyed the self-publishing through Amazon.
All right. We have a question from one of my students, Pebbles De Leon. What reference books do you use to guide you in honing your writing style, if any? If you don't use reference books, though, what practices work for you?
I love that question. That's a good one. And honestly, I don't read a lot of reference books, but there is one, and it's called, I should know the name of it off the top of my head, but it's specific to children's book publishing. And they do a new edition every year. So I have the out of date one, like children's book publishing for 2017 or something like that. But that book was like my beacon. I used it as like a really, a North Star of like, what are the insides of a children's book supposed to look like? And it kind of goes through, what works best and what kind of themes and how to like even format a book. So that was the main one that I used. And then I just use like a lot of like online blogs, honestly, of like, if I want to hone my craft, whatever part of the craft I want to work on, I'll just quickly go into Google and search specific to that topic. If I'm trying to, I don't know, strengthen my vocabulary around something, I'll do that specifically. Or if it's, I want to write in a different type of poetic way rather than just like kind of the prose stanza that I do, then I'll do that. But it's kind of an ad hoc as it comes. I will be like, I want to learn something about that. And I go and I learn. So.
Right. Sorry, could I get the title of the first book you mentioned again?
I think it's called Children's Book Publishing. Like that's it.
Okay.
And it's like Children's Book Publishing 2017. They write like a new edition every year. And they just like, it might be for specifically publishing the book and not necessarily writing it, but it was super helpful for me.
Okay, so like go-to guides and things like that.
Yep, exactly.
Nice. I forgot to mention, related to the earlier question about self-publishing, Lexie actually has a business and marketing background.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also, I guess, why you're like interested in seeing all the aspects of distributing books.
Yep, absolutely.
What are the common themes in children's stories, and how are they different in stories from other age groups?
Ooh, good question. So, I mean, kind of, I'll like kind of put it in y'all's head. Think back to the books that you read when you were younger. It's themes like friendship and kindness and being true to yourself. Those are typically the umbrellas that I write under because those are the ones that I remember reading as a kid. Something that another part of it is like fantastical, right? I haven't really dabbled into that area, or just like silly books. I love silly books, and that's why I wrote, let me pull that one out. I wrote this one, which is blurry, but it's called Splash Splash, and it's a silly book with silly words in it because when I was a kid, I liked reading and screaming silly words. So themes are kind of there's big buckets of them, right? The friendship, hope, things like that. And then you can kind of like as the tree map branches downwards, you can get into the more niche and specific ones. But I try to branch under like feel good stories, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So just to bridge the two questions together, I'll go back to the question before this, but this one's related to what you just answered. What advice can you give if we wish to make an informative children's book? How can we make it informative yet not so boring for a young child?
Ooh, that is something that I've not dabbled in yet, and I would like to. And honestly, it's probably because as a kid, I didn't want to read any of the informative books. I was always going towards the things that were colorful and bright and loud. But I would recommend, again, it's the research, right? It's pulling the necessary information you need to write that book accurately. So it's going to the library, going online, and making sure that your information and the informative like knowledge that you want to impart in your story is accurate. And then the art of weaving it into a like children's story, I'm not super familiar with, but I would assume it's it's editing, iteration, things like that. It would be very similar, but you would do a heavier emphasis and a heavier lift on the actual like informative topic that you want to discuss. I don't know if that helped. I'm not an expert on that one, but I like that question.
Hmm. Yeah, I think you really just have to like bring it down to the level of the reader and empathize with them, right?
Yeah, and I will say, kids are smarter than you think they are, and they take in more than you think they will. So you can drop some knowledge in that book. Don't be afraid to do that. I have read books that tackle kind of divisive issues, right? And kids need to have books like that. When I have a mentor who was telling me that books are windows and they're also mirrors. So they're windows into how someone else lives their life, and they're mirrors on how you live your life. Kids need both. They need both windows and mirrors in order to kind of be informative and informed citizens in the world. So don't be afraid to drop some knowledge in your book.
How would you determine if a children's book was successful or if it was able to impact its target audience in some ways?
It depends on how you define your success. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. For me, mine is not necessarily how many books did I sell or how much money did I make. I don't really pay attention too much to that. I more pay attention to what is the feedback I'm getting from my readers. What do all of the teachers that I've shared my books with? What do they say about it? And the young readers who are reading it before bedtime, right? Do they enjoy it? Do they say, "Mommy, I want to read that again. I want to read that again"? If I hear that, I know that I've done my job. So that's my metric that I kind of track against. Yours might be different. So it depends on what you want your book to do in the world.
Okay, that's so cute.
It's kind of mushy gushy, but that's how I feel.
Okay, so from Annika C, how do you strike the balance between writing a good story and incorporating a lesson in a way that's not boring or stereotypical?
Ooh, that's good. You guys are asking great questions. These are awesome. Um, it's hard, and like I said, like sometimes in the editing process, I'll get far enough down and realize, holy moly, I didn't do any sort of like mission with this book. I didn't. There's no like nugget of wisdom in it, and I have to go back and be like, okay, what do I want the story to tell? But also sometimes a story can just be a story, in my opinion. With my Splish Splash Splash book, there's not necessarily a lesson to be learned. I think that the purpose rather is a fun story to read aloud and to practice your onomatopoeia words. That's why I wrote it. Because there's bang and snap crack, like things like that in that story that I think it's purposeful. That's why that book is purposeful. Is there a lesson to be learned from it? I don't think so. Not necessarily, but there is a purpose. So I think that there's a difference between the lesson and the purpose. I always make sure that there's a purpose to the book I write. There doesn't always have to be a life-changing, profound lesson. So
Miguel Castañeda is asking, how do you keep your creative spark when you've been focusing on writing one book for a long time?
ooh, it's hard. Not gonna lie, it is hard. And I think my family always kind of jokes. I watch a lot of children's programming. I watch, lots of Disney movies, lots of Nick Jr., things like that. And they joke that, I'm doing it for research. I enjoy that content, but I also am kind of doing it for research, and it does spark that creativity in me. If I'm feeling kind of like my feet are dragging and I'm just not feeling the passion, I'll go back and I'll watch, like Finding Nemo. And I'll be like, oh, this is such a great story and such a great, way of telling it. And then I'll feel that spark again. And reading books like that also helps, right? Sitting in the middle of a pile of books kind of spread out also helps with kind of igniting the creative spark again. So it's the consumption of other kind of creative stories that kind of just fill my heart with, okay, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go and write, and it's going to be great.
I have personally witnessed Lexie do something like that, like a creativity circle, where she kind of surrounds herself with her drawings and things that make her happy. So yeah, that cannot be like overestimated. Just like going to that happy place. I think this is the last question, but I think it's really important also. How do you reach out or gather audience for your work and overcome the fear of your work being left unnoticed?
Ooh, solid question. I'll say your network is really important. And you might feel like that word network is like very fancy and kind of daunting. It's not. The people on this call are your network. I am your network now because you have seen me and spoken to me, and lean on that. Lean on the people who would, help guide you. So I know that I was very blessed in my elementary and middle school years to have instructors that guided me through, education and learning to love reading. So I leaned on them when it was my turn to say, hey, I created this story. What do you think? And so knowing that I have that support and have that feedback was paramount in how I, continued to write, 4 books and want to write many more. So lean on your network, lean on the people, the resources that you have. And that's definitely a nice tool to have in your tool belt, for sure.
The most important question I think that anyone has asked as of yet is from Eliana Esguerra. Can we see your dog, please?
He's sleeping right here. Okay. But he's that big lump right there. I don't know if you can see him.
Is he sleeping?
He's sleeping, yeah. He knew that something was happening, so he came over here when the call started and was kind of being nosy, but now he's fast asleep.
Aww.
Yeah. His name is Buffett, and he's this guy in here. That one. So that's my pup.
What kind of a dog is Buffett?
He's a golden retriever, and he is 12 years old.
Oh, wow.
Man, he's very quiet, an old soul. He's very kind. So that's Buffett.
Yeah, and if you want to learn more about Buffett, read Buffett and His Boy.
There you go. Perfect. Awesome.
Okay, so I think that's the last of it. Is there anything you want to add, Lexie?
I wish I had something like grand and profound to say, but honestly, writing is not a scary thing. I think that a lot of people, hear that I write and illustrate books and they're like, wow, that's what? Oh my goodness. And the thing I always kind of retort with is, you can do it too. So, I mean, you've got stories and you guys are all creative in your own way. So you can do it too. Like in this day and age, you have the resources, you have the network. If you've got the drive and the passion to do it, go for it. It is a fun experience. You'll learn a lot. You'll grow as a writer, as a creator. But don't be afraid. 2 feet first, jump right in.
Right. Thank you for that advice because many of the students here, especially in the humanities, and social sciences track, um, they take creative writing classes. And so there's no problem with like producing work. But I think what I hear from a lot of my students is the imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
Yeah. So yeah, it's not a scary thing. Write what you want to write.
Yep. And your stories are worthy. You know, you're not an
Mhm.
imposter. Your stories are worthy, and you know, people are out here to listen to them and to enjoy them. So go forth and conquer.
We have another Buffett question, I think. Does he disturb or play with you while you work?
He like is just like a support buddy. He kind of like dozes off. He sleeps a lot, and so if I'm working, he'll kind of lift his head up and go, "What are we doing? Oh, you're working still? Okay." And he kind of goes back to sleep. So he's a good writing companion for sure. He's not rambunctious or distracting. He's very peaceful and comforting.
All right. If anyone has any more questions, we still have a few minutes. But I want to take this time to thank you, Lexie, for being with us here today and for um, staying up until what is it now, 3 a.m.
Oh, I'm a night owl. I'm up always.
Well, still, I mean, um, yeah, just to talk to us all the way here in the other side of the world.
Yeah, how cool is that? It's awesome to be able to connect with you guys. I'm glad to do it, and you know, if you guys have questions, I'm an open book. If you have questions, like feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer. You know, I want to kind of pass the baton to future writers. I don't want to just hoard it for myself. I want you guys to learn it as well, and to be able to write your own stories.
Nice. That is so nice. So where can we reach you? Social media?
Yeah, so I will share. I think you guys have access to my presentation and it has my social handles, but if you just type in Lexie Yut on Instagram, you can find me on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitter, the whole gamut. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm pretty responsive across the board, but you can find out more about my writing process, and there's definitely a lot of photos of Buffett as well. But yeah, feel free to connect with me on any of those platforms.